Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, hear what Ben has to say about the Drought Monitor and wheat. Henry Merschman, President and CEO of Merschman Fertilizer, breaks down economic impact of prices going up in production. Hear the shocking changes in cost of inputs that affect your farm and business. Thanks for tuning in to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe.
Hi, this is Joe Merschman. Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Ben and my brother Henry from the fertilizer side of our business. And we'll start with Ben first, and then we'll get into the really good news when Henry starts, okay?
Yeah, I just had a couple short points I wanted to highlight where we are this year with the Drought Monitor in comparison to last year, first week of March. It looks like when we compare 2022 to 2021 for the Midwest, which is everything east of the Missouri River, eastern Iowa, southern Wisconsin, eastern or northwest Illinois is more heavily impacted by lack of rain. Some of that may have been diminished a little bit by this past moisture that we got late this week, but it's something that I'm paying really close attention to because this drought monitor is going to give us, in my opinion, how fast planters we roll in this spring. So when we're in years where there is a large percentage of our territory that's not in drought monitor, we have a tendency to lean towards more May planting. When we have a very, very dry year, we have a tendency to lean towards early to mid-April planting season. So something that I'm watching pretty closely. I'll put the link up and then Alex can kind of show you here what these two different maps look like. And this is, like I said, east of the Missouri River line there. And then I had the Great Plains as well, where I'm watching some of our customers in Nebraska. Eastern Nebraska is a little bit less affected this year than it was last year, but there is higher intensity in certain spots. So something I'm paying attention to because we're definitely looking at drought. And I also had a couple questions this past week with the price of wheat. It's actually receded a little bit this week, but I've had a lot of customers ask if you can plant winter wheat right now and get enough vernalization, and there's just not enough time for that to happen.
What, 50 days, I believe, vernalization?
30 to 75 is what it says, and that's basically where vernalization is, where the temperature after the seed germinates has to be in that 30 to 35 degrees for 30 to 70 days, and we just don't have enough time for that.
Ben also had a question this week about planting spring wheat. And I can tell you, I have sold spring wheat in this latitude in the past. It's never worked well. And the reason why is because spring wheat is designed to be in the cooler climates, so we just get too hot. You know, it's just a little bit like oats. Farther south you take oats, the less yield you get because it just cannot take the heat. So, and then the other thing too is spring wheat is a hard wheat. It's not a soft wheat.
Right. It's either hard or it's a soft white. So the marketing area for those products, that's one of the things I've been telling other customers is the marketing area, you'd have to haul it a long, long way, and you probably lose whatever profit you gained by the prices that we have.
And you're not going to be able to double crop it because it's going to come 30 days later than normal wheat. So. Yep. So anyhow, so just stay the course. I think that's a smart thing to do. This week, we brought Henry in to talk about the fertilizer side of this business, and right now, herbicides, chemicals, fungicides, insecticides, even seed treatments are very tight, and they're all tied to energy, and they're fertilizer the same way. And with the Ukrainian and Russian conflict, I'll let Henry take it from there and just how serious it is.
First of all, shout out to CG Transport. They are one of my major sponsors, and if you'd like to sponsor me, my agent's phone number will be listed at the end of this broadcast. So moving on, we'll go. First of all, I was on here before and we talked about some reasons why fertilizer prices are going up, and they were what I call the old reasons, and we got some new reasons. But it all started when we had that cold snap that went all the way down to Texas. Not this winter, the current winter it was the winter before, and it just really screwed up gas prices and so forth. And then we had extended turnarounds at plants, we had trade duties, we always have to throw COVID in there, everybody always has COVID problems. We had heard that the railroad had a policy that one of the members of the crew got COVID, the whole crew, no matter if they tested positive or negative, had to go on 12 days isolation, and so that caused a lot of problems with getting train cars moving. Then we had Hurricane Ida, and then of course we had higher grain prices, increased demand. So now the new reasons, we still have a lot of the old reasons still going on, but probably the biggest one is the natural gas price in Europe. And the other thing is that Russia announced this week there's going to be no exports from Russia for fertilizer. They're going to keep it in-house. They need it. And of course, maybe it's kind of like when you tell somebody you're fired, no, I quit. Well, a lot of people aren't buying from them anyway, so I guess it's kind of a moot point. But Russia is number 1 in nitrogen in global exports. They're number 3 in phosphate in global exports, and they're number 3 in potash in global exports. So it is a big deal. Now, getting back to natural gas, a lot of the natural gas that is used in Europe comes from Russia. So I had to call some people yesterday to try and get the conversion of what's going on, that gas price compared to our gas price in the U.S. Yesterday, the gas price in Europe was a little over $55 a unit. It was as high as $91 a unit. Yesterday in the USA, the gas closed at $4.65. So gas is significantly higher in Europe. So the cash cost to make a ton of ammonia at $55 gas in Europe, this is the cash cost. It does not consider the overhead, the plant, depreciation, et cetera, strictly cash costs, is $1,831. So in Europe yesterday, if you bought gas, ran your plant, that's just your cash cost, then you got all your overhead. When gas was 91 this winter at one time, a ton of ammonia costs $3,007 cash cost. And I'm afraid to tell you what the cash cost for making a ton of ammonia in the United States today with $4.65, because I'm afraid I'll get letters. But it's $178. So it is absolutely crazy what's going on in the world. Now, so let's look at this cheap gas in the U.S. And I'm going to pick on CF Industries a little bit because they're the large, dominant domestic producer, and they do have plants overseas in Europe and stuff too. So, but believe it or not, as they are making an insane amount of money today. There's no doubt about it with that low-cost gas. But the third quarter of 2020, CF actually reported a loss. So I mean, things have changed that dramatically in this fertilizer world. What is really neat about this whole situation is I can walk out of this office or this room right now and go back to my office, and I can buy stock in CF. And if I don't like the way they're managing it, I can sell it. In 1 minute, I can be an owner of CF stock, and in 1 minute, I can get rid of it. So is this a great country or what? So my grandpa, I was with him one time, and he was talking to the neighbor, and the neighbor was talking about how he took his hogs to the market. And he said, I didn't make any money. And he said, well, who's making all the money? He said, well, the packing plants are. He said, well, then I suggest you buy stock in packing plants. And so it's a little like that. Yes, they're making a lot of money. But I talked to a guy today, and they have plants in Europe, and he said, in Europe today, UAN nitrogen is $200 higher in Europe than it is in the U.S. Right now, on almost all products in the U.S., nitrogen, phosphate, potash, we're lower than most all the world markets. And so it's really interesting how the prices are the way they are, and it's mainly because of this gas thing going on in Europe. So when people say that there's price fixing going on, there's all these other things going on, it's strictly a supply and demand situation in Europe. Now, I bring this up, and they're saying, well, they're making way too much money on ammonia if they got that cheap gas. And so my question would be, if you were a farmer and you bought land for $1,000 and you decided to rent it out, and you bought it for $1,000 decades ago, would you base it on what you paid for it, or would you base it on what the current market is? And I think we all know the answer to that. You're going to base rent on what the current market is. So let's go back to the facts a little bit, and let's just talk about what's really going on in these prices, and let's compare. So in June of 2020, the corn price was about $3. Yesterday, the local corn river was over $7.30. That's a 245% increase in corn price. So then I went back in June of 2020 and looked at fertilizer prices. Nitrogen was up 265%, phosphate's up 275%, and potash is up 315%. Yes, they're up a lot. I don't disagree. The average of the fertilizer is up 285%. So then I went to Iowa State production cost of 2022, and it's corn following beans. Now, these are moving numbers, but I just took what they had. Fertilizer is typically 21% of the total production cost to produce corn, and we're shooting for 218 bushel an acre. So I asked this question. So if someone asked you, would you pay 285% more for 21% of your inputs, but you get to sell 100% of your goods for 245% more, would you take that deal? And I think the high percent of the farmers would say, if not all of them, would say, yeah. I mean, so the other thing I hear about is these high prices, and they talk about they don't like them and stuff, but the majority of the farmers out there for 2022, I would say, they bought stuff, so a lot of them bought stuff last summer, they put it on last fall, they got a lot of stuff locked in. A much smaller percentage actually have done nothing and are looking at these high prices. So if anything, most of the farmers should have a pretty good year. Last week, I again took Iowa State input costs. I put the new fertilizer prices in, and at 218 bushel corn, what they shoot for, the farmer could make $411 an acre. And this wasn't the total cost per acre, production cost was close to $950. And that was taking the current grain market of what you could sell in November at the local river. And so you can make $411. And I would think a lot of people, you guys would agree, you went to Iowa State. I think Iowa State's numbers, if anything, are probably on the higher side, except maybe for land. Their land's a little cheap, it seems like.
So it's not all doom and gloom, but it's just that we've ratcheted it up the risk. You know, in other words, will this bubble pop? You know, how long will it take for this thing to supply and demand to come back in equilibrium? Obviously, Europe and the rest of the world is running at the U.S. to buy product, and companies are saying, you know, hey, if you want my product, I'll export it at this, and so that tightens our supply. Is that part of it too?
That's, you know, if you can, you know, if there are other low-cost producers in the world, if you go to the Middle East, like Qatar and so forth. So if you're going to export product, are you going to come to the U.S. that has low-cost gas? No, you're going to go to Europe right now, you know. And so the U.S. still needs a significant amount of imports to come in. So if they don't raise their prices, then people aren't going to come here, and then you're not going to have enough. You know, it's a world event is what it is.
What's the tightest of all the products, NPK? Which one's the hardest to get your hands on, even considering logistics?
You know, nitrogen seems to be more readily available. The phosphate and potash gets tighter because, you know, it's a limited natural resource. You know, you can build a nitrogen plant. You know, we have one built here locally, and you can build it wherever there's a natural gas supply. But so I think the phosphate and potash are we've been more restricted. I mean, in almost every situation, we are limited on what we can buy from our producer that we've been buying for decades. They limit us. And it's not that they don't want to sell us. They want to sell us all they can at these prices, but they have limited production themselves. They've had some issues and so forth.
So the mines in Canada, the one that flooded, have they opened that new shaft?
That plant is up and running and doing well. But one of the issues that they were talking about was they said that they can't get rail cars turning. I mean, they send rail cars out and the plant's running and they got orders on the books and the rail cars aren't showing back up. empties. It's taken so long, and I hear this in all of it, in all the nitrogen, phosphate, and potash. Nobody can get rail cars because
you need to call Warren Buffett then.
Yeah, good luck.
Good luck.
But nobody likes higher fertilizer prices. I mean, and they say, well, the producers do. Yeah, yes and no. They like it short term, but if you look at history, when a lot of money is made in the fertilizer industry cannot stand prosperity. Because as soon as they make a lot of money, they either build new plants, they do brownfield expansions, debottleneck, and they have more product. Within 5 years, there's usually abundance. You go look at history and you'll see that. So although they like them, you got to be careful that you don't overproduce. And this is the last thing I'll say. A good friend of mine who farms also, he says, go look at history and you'll say the farmers made more money during high fertilizer prices than low fertilizer prices, because when fertilizer prices are extremely low, so are grain prices.
Mm-hmm.
So, this summer is probably going to be the more difficult time with these high prices. We don't see prices coming down off like a reset much lower when it's over because of what's going on. There's too many variables, and who wants to buy product at really, really high numbers? And so there's a lot of people that are going to stick their neck out. And just having the pocketbook to pay for these products, you got a bank line and you just can't go into your bank and say, triple my line. It's not that easy.
So this conflict will at some point get over, and then you would think the Russians, it's costing them a lot of money. I mean, every day it's costing them money. They're going to want to produce to the high heaven all these raw materials that they have, because what I had read was, after the Soviet Union collapsed, so did all their manufacturing. And so right now the Soviet Union over the last 30 years has primarily been an exporter of raw materials, precious metals and natural gas, fertilizer is probably potash, and they do mine, but in other words, they really don't manufacture tractors, cars, whatever, per se. They're going to want to get back into business as soon as they possibly can, I would think, but how quick will that happen, particularly after all these problems?
It's going to take a while, but what people don't realize is the long-term effect. So if you've got plants in Europe and you had issues with Russia, are you going to start saying, you know what, maybe I ought to start looking for an alternative supply of gas? And I think it's going to hurt Russia, just like when we relied on Saudi Arabia years and years ago, and they cut us off. What happened? A decade later,
we figured out how to frack. Yeah.
And so things will change, and I think some of these things are opening the eyes of these long term.
Well, and farmers also are going to split their nitrogen. They're going to become more efficient with their nitrogen. They're going to use less nitrogen, and that will come into play too. In other words, they say, well, rather than I'll just put 220 pounds on. Now they're going to say, hey, I can see if I can raise a crop with, 175, 180 pounds,
Well, we're actually using less fertilizer today than we did, a few decades ago because of the efficiencies, what we're using.
Yeah, we got variable rates and a lot of technology that's coming in right now for precisely feeding that plant.
But as soon as people hear these high fertilizer prices, they immediately think in their mind they can't make money. But I think if you look at the facts, you can still make money at these because you have high grain prices. And grain prices, as I showed earlier, they have moved up very close. I mean, they're up 245%, and fertilizer prices are up 285%. Fairly close, actually.
Well, nobody knows how bad the Ukraine crop's going to get hurt. I mean, wheat, for example, needs to be fertilized right now over in Ukraine. Are they focused on fertilizing wheat, or can they even get fertilizer? Do they have the fertilizer? Are they going to be able to harvest it? A lot of unknowns. So yeah, you're right. It's going to take some time to figure out exactly what's going on. So it's I had also read and heard this week that a lot of their oil fields are in the tundra areas where they have permafrost all the time, and if if they shut the flow off, in other words, they can't get rid of the oil, the natural gas, those wells basically freeze up and then they become worthless. And it took them 30-some years to develop the oil fields, and they could, and the reason why is because there's a line in Russia where so much of it will go to China because it goes east, and then they have so much of it that goes west, but they have no infrastructure to move the oil and the natural gas to the east. They're set up to send it to Europe. So if they lose those fields, it'll be a long time before this will get straightened out.
Last fall, we were looking at buying a 12,000-ton tow. We needed one more tow of 32%. And the price had gone up so much. I mean, it was really expensive for you look at it and it was millions and millions of dollars. And we were like, I just couldn't bring myself to buying it because it's a commodity and we're not going to make a higher margin. You're going to make a commodity margin whether it's this price or this price. I told one of my colleagues at the time, I said, you know what? If I was smart, of course we know I'm not smart.
I agree with that. No, that's good.
Take the same amount of money that tow costs, and just because if the nitrogen producers are making all the nitrogen, buy CF stock. So this week, I called John. He's my salesman, and I said, "Remember?" He said, "I remember. I wrote it down." We ran some numbers. I could have made 18 times more money on that tow to buy CF stock than I would have if I just bought the product and sold it. 18 times more.
It's always an opportunity in there. You just got to find it.
So you need to invest in packing plants.
That's right.
Like Grandpa said. So anyway.
Well, that's a good explanation of what we have, and everybody always wants to know what's coming, but it's just impossible to predict right now. It's just impossible.
They don't think there's going to be much, if any, reset on fertilizer prices going into summer. It's going to be very difficult decisions for everybody to make.
There is one good thing, and that is that at Merschman Seeds we took the limit off.
Took the limit off what?
Seeds? You can buy all the seed you want right now. There's no shortage of seed.
It's good to know.
Good to know. So, well, every year is a different set of problems. It wasn't that long ago we were worried about profitability. In other words, that was our biggest problem. How are we going to stay in this game when we can't pencil a profit? Now there's an opportunity for a profit. It's just trying to figure out how to lock it in and manage it. So it's a different set of problems. And we were always taught by our parents that problems are opportunities, and and how you manage them determines your success. So there is an opportunity here, no question about it. Well, that brings us to the corny jokes, and if any of you got to go. I got a couple ag ones, and then I got one ag one here. I think one of them probably not that good. But what do you call a tractor that sells medicine? What do you call a tractor that sells medicine? A pharmacist. Okay.
I know I should have.
Have you ever had this happen? Is it when I got to work this morning? My boss stormed up to me and said, "You missed work yesterday, didn't you?" And I said, "No, not particularly." Okay. St. Patrick's Day coming up this coming week. Why do Irish people recycle? They like to be green. Okay. Very timely. Why shouldn't you iron a 4-leaf clover? Why shouldn't you iron a 4-leaf clover? You might press your luck. What do you think, Henry?
Should have left.
All right. Well, thanks for coming in today, Henry, with some good insight and some good advice. We appreciate it. And Ben will watch the drought monitor to see how quick we're going to plant. I know the skunks said we're going to plant early, so everything's matching up for this year. So, as always, thank you for watching today or listening on podcast. We appreciate your business. We hope that you and your family are safe and healthy. We'll see you next week.